You're listening to Sound Opinions. I'm Greg Cott with Jim DeRogatis, and we are here with Benmont Tench from Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Benmont, welcome to Sound Opinions.
I'm so happy to be here. I really am. I mean, I'm very happy.
Well, we're honored. You're one of the few people that actually follow us on Twitter and stuff. So, Benmont, we wanted to do sort of a career retrospective. You're out there touring again with Petty this summer, and your own story is a fascinating one. I also think, and I mean this as the highest compliment, you are the consummate rock and roll sideman.
Well, thank you.
You know, you appear on so many records, and you make all of them better. So we wanted to explore that concept, too. You know, so many different styles and artists. But I want to start in the beginning, in Gainesville. You're 11 years old, and you meet this tall, gangly, blonde guy in a record store. Is that right?
No, it's a music store. What happened was I'd been living in Panama when the Beatles came out. I was like 10, and I turned 11 in Panama and moved back to the U.S., back to Gainesville. And the Beatles had just knocked my head off. There was a music store, and my father helped me get an electric guitar there. And I started haunting the music store. I think they let me haunt it. I just kind of play all these weird keyboards that were showing up like Vox Continentals and things. They let me haunt it, probably thinking that my father would help me buy something else.
Yeah. Well, he was a judge, right?
He was a judge. And there was this group of older guys. I was like 11, and they were like 14 or 15, who looked intimidating because they had Beatle haircuts, and this was 1964 or 65. And in the South, if you have a Beatle haircut, most people have one, and then it kind of flips up in an awkward place because of the humidity. It just doesn't work down there. So there were a bunch of dark-haired guys. And they all looked intimidating, even though they were wearing like white shirts and a little tie or whatever you had to wear when you were in high school or skipping high school and working at the music store. One of them had blonde hair, and that was Tom. And so I didn't actually meet him, but I saw him. And he saw me, the kid who came in all the time.
Yeah.
And so I knew, okay, and eventually I figured out, some of those guys are in a band. They have a band. I think their band was called the Epics. I think a couple of those guys. So I kept haunting the music store. And I wound up at boarding school because the schools in Gainesville, my parents didn't think they were very good. Went up to New England. And I came back on a break, and my best friend in Gainesville, two of my best friends, had said, you have to see this band, Mudcrutch. And they took me up to see them play a club. And the blonde guy walks out on stage. And it's like, oh, it's that guy.
That cool guy.
Yeah, so we knew we'd seen each other, but we didn't talk until I was a few years older than that. Yeah, but I mean, we'd seen each other around since I was 11 or 12.
So he's got the biggest band in town. How do you get invited into that band?
I didn't get invited in. Well, here's what happened. Mudcrutch was a known band that had done something interesting, thrown their own festival out at some house, some shack they owned that they called Mudcrutch Farm. That I don't think I ever went out there, maybe once. And so they had some repute. But they were also playing, to make ends meet, a club that had dancers, in quotes, called Dubs. And my friend Sandy was helping them load their gear. And and after a while, I had started going to see them whenever I was home because they were really good. Like I walked into the Astro Lounge in Lake City, Florida, and these guys are on stage, and the drummer, Randall Marsh, just swung like a son of a bitch. He was just fantastic. And that was the first thing I noticed. And they made a sound, and the interplay of guitars with Mike Campbell and Tom Ledden was it was gorgeous, you know. It wasn't what television did later, but it was kind of like that, except there's a little Grateful Dead in Mike's playing. It was a little more country coming from Ledden, but there was that chiming, intertwining thing that you got later in bands like television. It was just this sound. And their choice of songs was fantastic. They did stuff like Dizzy Miss Lizzy, but they did songs that I didn't recognize that I later found out were Burrito Brothers albums tracks and things like that. And every now and then they did songs that would knock me out, and I'd say to my friend Sandy, what record's that on? He'd say, oh, Tom wrote it. I'm like, really? And so they're playing this club with dancers, Dubs, and they said, you want to come down and sit in? And I went... I was driving my mother's station wagon, and I picked up my Farfisa Combo compact organ, which weighed more than I
Yeah.
did. They were really heavy, and they still are because I still have one. And I remember dragging it out, looking at lifting it into the back of the station wagon to go sit in with these guys and thinking, do I really want to
Is this
bring
worth
this?
it?
Or no, really, is this worth it?
Yeah.
Or do I just want to go see them play? Because I love seeing them play. They're just bored. They don't really want me to sit in with them because they're a band and I'm just this kid. And I went, okay, I'll put it in the car. And I sat in with them. And they said, sit in with us anytime you're around. And so, like, that's the life-changing moment. Is
Wow.
I came so close to just not putting the Farfisa in.
Yeah.
Well, that's a great story. I love that story, and we've heard variations of that story from the greats. Like we had Alan Toussaint in here before he died, obviously.
Playing that piano.
He was on that piano, but he told us a similar story about he'd been doing all this playing, at his home, at his mother's house, playing on the piano every day. He saw it as a big toy, and then it became this thing that he couldn't escape. He had to play every day.
Exactly.
And it's like he was a young kid. He gets that tap on the shoulder from a much older guy who's, a giant in town in New Orleans, and says, can you sit in tonight? And he was ready for his moment. He didn't know he was ready, but he was ready. Like the opportunity knocked, and he had the chops and the want to take advantage of it. And it almost sounds like you had the same kind of moment where it could have gone either way. If you hadn't sat in, who knows what would have happened, right?
Yeah.
But you were ready for it, too. So how did you get ready? How were you ready for that moment?
It's really, the 1960s were really interesting, and I'm sure every decade is interesting, but the 1960s seemed to me to be some kind of a renaissance. Like from Elvis showing everybody, look what's going on in black music, and everybody going, oh, to the little dips that still had good pop music, to the Beatles coming along and just slamming stuff. It's a real cultural moment in a Renaissance period. So I grew up with my parents listening to like Rodgers and Hammerstein, my father playing some Chopin and Beethoven on the piano and also playing classical guitar. All of this stuff, and a little bit of Art Tatum on the stereo too. And I would listen to whatever was on the radio, whether it was his latest Flame by Elvis or The Night Has a Thousand Eyes, Bobby V, I think. Maybe Fenton. So all of this stuff gets in your head, and when they sent me off to boarding school, I was listening to the stuff on the radio, which was a lot of British Invasion, and I loved and loved and loved and loved it. And soul music, more Memphis than Motown. Motown isn't really soul, it's its own thing.
Yeah.
And I go up to boarding school in New England, and the country was so regionalized in terms of radio that all these kids from all over the country are listening to different things. And one kid, because it was the fall of 1967 when I went up there, one kid is listening to that first Velvet Underground record. I'm like, this is very strange. I'm not sure about this. And then the song Heroin came on, and I'm like, this is fantastic. But I was still pulled more towards the California stuff, like the Byrds, and more toward the English stuff. But it's like, oh, this is there. And at the same time, New England and New York were kind of the first places in the country that seemed to pick up on the British sending the blues back to the Americans. So there were really good guitar players and organ players, these kids who were 16 or 17, who were coming from New York, from Chicago. There was a guy named Mesereau from Chicago who was a great organ player. And there was a guy named Manny Friedman from New York who was a great guitar player. And so they play something, and I'm like, what's this? Oh, that's an Elmore James song called Look Over Yonder's Wall. I'm like, who's Elmore James? So all of this stuff gets put in me at once. Then my best friend, Bill, I make a friend from Detroit. His name's Bill Magoon. And he goes, you got to hear the MC5. And the first MC5 album came out like right then.
68.
And I'm like, what is this? Yeah, we were best friends. And he's like, there's this band, the MC5, they're going to put a record out, wait till you hear it. And it comes out, and I'm like, what on earth is this? But then I heard the Stooges, and then later when I heard Funhouse, holy moly. So there's all of this stuff going on in my head, and those crazy early Todd Rundgren records, and more when I go to a little bit of college. So there's all of this going on, and I'm playing these bands, and all sorts of different kinds of music, leaning towards trying to play blues, but not just dabble in it, but really be present in it. And so I was open to all sorts of music.
Yeah.
And what Mudcrutch was playing had all sorts of music in it, but I wasn't hearing. I hadn't been listening to like the Burritos and that side of it, and I hadn't been listening to that much Dylan. Like, the one that took me away was John Wesley Harding's the one that took my head off. So all of this stuff was in my head, and I'd been sitting around. And the other thing to be a motor mouth about that boarding school experience was I was learning how the parts went. This is how Alan Price played this. This is how Dave Roberry played this. This is how, so-and-so played this. And I had learned Ray Manzarek's solo from Light My Fire. And a guy, I think his name was Grover Coors, looked at me, listened to me play, and said, "That's fantastic. What on earth are you doing?" I'm like, "What do you mean?" Because he was really good. I had a Farfisa, he had a Continental. He said that's all wrong. I said, "What do you mean?" He said, "You're playing it like the record." I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's not the point. The point is how will you play it?" And I'm like, "Okay." And that set me off. And so I was open to be able to play with all these things.
That's the lesson at 16,
That's
17.
a huge lesson. It's a huge lesson. No, it's not the way that guy played it. It's the way that you play it. Use it to take off.
All right, I want to get, before we get further along the story, you dropping out of college, 2 footnotes. What's so wonderful about the Farfisa? Because I agree with you. It's amazing. I have a Fast 5, which I can't play, much lighter than the older one. For people who don't know, there's something magical about a Farfisa. What do you think it is?
Well, at some point, probably the early 60s, they decided that there needed to be an organ that was more portable than a Hammond, I suppose.
Yeah, those were you needed 2 people for those.
You needed 2 people, at least. And also it had a huge speaker cabinet, a Leslie cabinet.
Yeah.
So I didn't even consider it. And the way that it was used when I was growing up by the people in the neighborhood wasn't the kind of music that I liked. They didn't play like Booker. But these portable organs, there was the Vox Continental, there was the Farfisa. The Farfisa had preset sounds for you. The Vox Continental, you had to pull drawbars to make your own sound. And so I went for the one with preset sounds, which is the Farfisa. They're both wonderful, but they're humble, they're soulful, they are not lo-fi, but they, here's the difference. The Allman Brothers play a Hammond organ.
Yeah.
Booker T and the MGs, it's a Hammond organ. Procol Harum, Whiter Shade of Pale is a Hammond organ.
Al Cooper with
Al
Dylan.
Cooper with Dylan, that's a Hammond organ. And like Refugee is a Hammond organ. And it's a fantastic instrument. I love it. When a Man Loves a Woman is a Farfisa. And if you think about that plain and plaintive and almost hymn-like tone that doesn't have any grandiosity and feels like a part of the singer's voice, feels like part of Percy's voice. Spooner Oldham with that 3-note dumb hum, like he called it, holding, playing that song. It connects to the soul in a different way. And the same with the other main portable organ, the Vox Continental, which has drawbars and has a different sound. And that's what's played by Alan Price on House of the Rising Sun. And it's what Steve Naive uses so brilliantly with Elvis Costello.
With Elvis.
They have a more kind of homespun sound.
Yeah, they're punk.
They're more punk, but they're also, Percy Sledge isn't punk, but I guess he kind of is. Punk is just, when stuff got too away from the heart, although I'm sure every glam and prog band and everything was doing it with all their heart, the ones that were any good. But when it got too far away from the heart, punk came along.
Right.
And so, in a way, the best punk is as close to the heart as Percy Sledge is.
Sure.
Or as Louis Bloody Armstrong is. And now you're talking the real
that's
thing.
Punk. All right, so the
that's
other thing,
real thing.
the other footnote I didn't want to stray too far from, has it ever gotten better than playing with go-go dancers on stage?
They weren't there that night.
Oh, no!
They
I
weren't there
did
that
done a
night,
couple of
'cause
gigs with
I
my
would have
punk band
noticed
with a
that.
burlesque troupe,
I
and
would have
that is as
noticed
good
that.
as life gets.
They probably recognized that you were underage, so they wanted to protect you from,
Either
having.
that or they were like, like, I'm not going to dance for this kid.
Can you ring up Tom and just say, hey, we need dancers, man?
I don't remember seeing any dancers that night. And I think that I would have at that tender age. I would have remembered.
So the archetypal, the perhaps apocryphal story is you're doing some college. You just said I did some college, but you didn't finish because Mudcrutch asks you to join, and your dad, the judge, said Tom has to make the case.
Well, no, he didn't say that. But,
Okay.
But Tom did make the case. I was in college at Tulane, which was great in a lot of ways because there was a great club called the Warehouse where I saw all sorts of people, but also I could see Professor Longhair play. And I could see them. I didn't even see the meters. They were playing at freshman orientation or something on, across the lawn. And I just heard that bubbling into my consciousness. So New Orleans was marvelous. But on vacation from college, like Christmas, summer, whatever, I was playing with Mudcrutch. And I was cramming for an economics final because I had to take an elective. And I thought economics would be interesting, and I was wrong. And so, of course, I didn't study. And so the night before, it's 2 a.m, and I'm cramming for an economics final. And the phone rings, and it's Tom. I'm like, oh, what are you up to? He said, because Mudcrutch was in South Florida, we just played a set at a club in Naples or something like that. I said, what are you doing? He said, playing a set in Naples. He said, what are you doing? I said, cramming for an economics final. He said, what are you doing? Like literally like that. And I said, you're right. So I finished the semester and came home, played with Mudcrutch all summer. And the next semester came, and my sister went off to college, and I didn't. I didn't tell my parents. And so I told my parents, the women's college, Newcomb, starts a little earlier than Tulane does. And I was totally like, how am I going to tell my father he's going to lose his mind? And he figured it out before I told him. And he was mad. Like, he was going to throw me out of the house. My mother was like, no, it's okay. And my father's like, no, if he isn't going to go to college, he's going to earn a living, he's going to make his own way, he's going to get his own way, he's out. And Tom talked to my dad. I don't know what he said. I suspect he said something like, look, if it doesn't work out, he can always go back to school, but we've got a really good band here or whatever. But I think his motivation was that if my parents threw me out of the house, I was going to have to crash on somebody's couch, and it might be his. I think he's like, no, he's not going to get thrown out of his parents' house.
Wouldn't you love to have the tape of what Tom Petty said to your dad today?
It's one of my great nightmares. I break out in a cold sweat. My father was a good, serious, hardcore, smart man. And he was not going to take any crap.
Well, I'm just picturing this guy in the robe on the bench,
Yeah, he's
at home,
he's used to making hard decisions.
He actually wasn't like that. My father was kind of this cross between, like, he had the oratorial skills of Orson Welles, but in a deep, beautiful Southern baritone voice, and a bit of Atticus Finch in him. He was just remarkable. He was really remarkable. And he was just fantastic. My mother too. But to see Tom and my father talking, that must have been really something.
I bet.
Because nobody was going to fool anybody in that room.
But Mudcrutch, as good as you were, the first incarnation did not go as well as had been hoped. It was the band never really kind of got to that plane that maybe it deserved at that point.
Well, the truth of the matter is that Tom Ledden left the band.
Yeah.
Danny Roberts, who was a really good, like, blues-type guitarist and kind of a blues shouter of a singer, joined while I was in school, and he would play. Tom was always the bass player, and Danny would play guitar, double guitar with Mike, and sing some of his songs. And he would also sometimes play bass, so Tom could play rhythm guitar, because Tom was starting to do that. But Danny was from a different mindset, and I think the rest of Mudcrutch still had more of the, like, Burritos, Bob, Graham, Birds, Rolling Stones thing, and Danny was coming more from maybe where the Allman Brothers were coming from. So it kind of became this mixing, this melted thing that I don't know really worked that well, especially when I quit school and got in it full time. It was a really good live band. Like, it was a really good live band. I heard a tape recently, and it was like, wow, those guys they're good. But it was a little unfocused because I was listening to Todd Rundgren, the Beatles, Stooges, the MC5, and Steely Dan's first album. And that's where my writing was coming from. And Tom's coming from a really pure place of, like Porter Wagoner and Neil Young or something in his writing. And Danny's coming from Johnny Winter. And so we were trying to keep a band like that together. And we came out and we were really good live. We were, I think, I heard this tape and I heard us playing Rip It Up. I'm like, that's really bloody good. But we got in the studio and we sucked in the studio. We just sucked. We just plain sucked. We had recorded a demo in my parents' living room, totally live. I can't imagine that we had headphones or monitors. And it's really good. But we got in an actual studio and we were terrible. The famous Sound City out in L.A. And we were just awful. I heard the first playback, and I was just crestfallen.
Did you think you would ever get back together with Tom and give it another go, or did you feel like, man, that's the end of something? It's not going to work.
When Mudcrutch broke up?
Yeah.
I didn't think it was going to go because Tom stayed with our record label. Mudcrutch broke up. Tom stayed with the record label and was making a solo record, and he had said, okay, the band's broken up, but I'm keeping Mike. And so they were making a record, and they had heroes like Jim Gordon and Jim Keltner playing drums, and Paul Griffin playing piano, Al Cooper playing organ, all these people like that. And I'm like, okay, they've gone off to the big leagues, and I was still friends with them. And Tom played me some stuff he cut with those guys. I'm like, holy moly, these guys are good. And I didn't think so. So my friend Tim Kramer from boarding school was working at the Village Recorder in Los Angeles and called me up and said, they've given me time to learn to be a recording engineer. If you want to record some of your songs for free at where, like Steely Dan recorded their first album, come in. And I went, okay. And I called Stan Lynch, my friend from Florida, whose band Road Turkey used to open for Mudcrutch. And I said, Stan, we can go in and record. We wanted to have a band called The Drunks, modeled after the Faces, except we were going to drink even more than the Faces. So we were going to go and record. And I said, let's get Campbell to play guitar. You play drums. I want Randall to play on one song because I just love Randall, and let's get him in the studio. But you play drums. I'll get Mike to play guitar. And he said, Ron Blair is a great bass player. I said, get Ron. He's from Gainesville. And he said, Jeff Gerard is a really good guitar player. I said, fantastic. So they all came down, and we cut a couple of songs of mine, one of which is really dreadful, and the one that I can't find was actually pretty good, and it was such a Faces knockoff. I would get sued so hard.
Not that anybody cared about the
Not
Faces.
anybody cared. I had called Tom and said, hey, man, I've never sung on a real microphone. You come in and give a listen and say, sing it, try it like this and maybe play harmonica on something. He said, sure. And he's in the middle of working with Cooper and Keltner and Jim Gordon and everybody. And he comes down, and his wife and I, his first wife and I, were really close friends. And she calls me the next day or 2 days later and says, Tom really liked that band. And then I get a call a couple of days later. Tom really likes the band. Come down to the studio. Bring Jeff Gerard. He doesn't want to try the whole band at once because he's already got Jim Gordon and Emery Gordy booked. Yeah. And it's like, okay. So we gradually brought the band in. And so basically he took the Drunks. Yeah. The band should be called Tom Petty and the Drunks. And the Drunks. Which is kind of a good name.
Yeah. So you put the Heartbreakers together.
Me and Stan.
Yeah.
Me and Stan put the band together.
I know that guy Cooper. He's a lightweight.
He's a lightweight. He's nothing. He's nothing. Yeah.
He tells good stories.
Yeah, but he's never sarcastic. Well, that's one thing about Al Cooper. He's never sarcastic. But yeah, so that's what happened.
Right.
But I got that call from Jane, Tom really likes that band. I'm like, yeah, me too. And it's the next call was so bring it down to the studio.
Did you ever think he had to take you because you'd put the band together?
Kind of like Bill Wyman had the best amps, so they,
Right, right,
took 'em
right,
for the
right.
He also
Yeah.
turned out to be the best bass player for the Rolling Stones
Oh,
possible.
yeah,
Yes,
for
My-
sure.
My
Yes.
Lord, he's so good.
He is. It hasn't been the same since post Bill.
Well, you had mentioned punk earlier, and it was funny. I was like 19 or something, and I was starting to review records in college, and this Counterculture Weekly was sending me records to review. And one of the first records I got to review was the Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers debut record. And he
Yeah.
goes, I said, "Do you know anything about these guys?" He goes, "No, I really don't. I think they're a punk rock band. I mean, look at the guy on the cover. Well, they had Tom in that
It was new wave
bandolier
marketing.
of bullets and stuff like that on the
It was
cover.
no
and
wave.
He was kind of snarling at the camera, or looking
Yeah,
very Tom.
I
Petty.
know.
And so it was this kind of image, and punk was sort of in the air. So it was kind of taken as part of the new wave punk rock, and it was interesting how you guys were marketed back then.
They didn't know what to do with them.
Yeah.
They didn't know what to do because the philosophy when the band started, and it's my favorite philosophy, though I do like to, go and stretch out with stuff. But the philosophy at the time was we weren't hearing stuff that we liked. We weren't hearing stuff that we liked. And we all loved the way that Tom wrote, and then Tom and Mike started writing together. But it was like, are there really good songs out there that aren't played by people in white satin tight pants with like crazy, wild, frilly stuff going on, or just where's just the plain straight ahead, here's some rock and roll with really good songs and a band that plays well. Like, not a band that's being fancy, but a band that just plays well. Like, where is that? Nobody's doing it. We like it, so let's do it. We didn't say that out loud, but that's what we loved. The Faces, the Rolling Stones, like up until 71 or so, 72. Like that stuff. Like, where was that stuff? And it wasn't around. There was like, Styx was there. There was the California singer-songwriter thing going on.
Yeah.
The Rolling Stones were still doing some really good stuff, but they seemed a little unfocused. Goat's Head Soup has Winter on it, but it also has some stuff that's not so good. I think. So we just wanted to do that, and it coincided with a similar thought, but a much rougher and much rawer thought coming out of New York and then London. But I had loved the New York Dolls. Yeah. I was in college and somebody said, "You got to hear this band. They sound like the MC5 with a bull moose singing lead." I'm like, what? Okay, I'll sign on. And I'm like, okay, I loved the New York
But
Dolls.
there's New Orleans in the Dolls, and there's
there's everything in the Dolls. The
everything,
Dolls were like
50s
the
and-
Rolling Stones. The New York Dolls were like coming from rhythm and blues.
Yeah, yeah.
You know.
But we were talking about Lester Bangs earlier. The problem with the Stones is they had become on the mountaintop. They were no longer accessible. We couldn't be the Stones. There was a separation, whereas the Dolls were like, they walked off the floor of the club onto the stage.
Right. But
They were us.
Well, the Rolling Stones came out of a different time and there's also something about the Rolling Stones were probably kind of always on the mountaintop. I mean, like
Yeah,
probably Denny Cordell, who produced our first couple of records and signed us, said that when he was in London as a young man, he'd see the Rolling Stones and they'd be sitting on stools, because they were more of a purist blues band. But I think that pretty quickly they figured, like, oh, we're going to be special.
Yeah.
And they were their own kind of mountaintop, probably pretty quick, at least as far as when I was 11 and I heard Satisfaction. That was pretty much of a mountaintop.
But you read that other great Southerner, Stanley Booth's True Adventures of the Rolling Stones.
That is one of the best books ever written about rock and
It
roll.
absolutely is, sir. See,
But why does
you
he
should
hate-
be a rock critic.
Why does he hate Nicky Hopkins?
That's a good question. Maybe he's just jealous, or
I-
maybe
I-
Keith hated him that week.
I love Ian Stewart, but Nicky
Yeah,
Hopkins,
yeah.
holy moly.
Hopkins is great.
Yeah, he was great.
But there was a time when the Stones were just regular guys. Those scenes of Charlie walking through the grounds of Altamont and just,
Oh, sure.
you know.
Oh, sure, yeah. I know what you mean.
Yeah.
But they were always like kind of musically a mountaintop. That's for sure.
Some of those songs, what's it like when Tom Petty comes in to rehearsal, jam session, recording session, I don't know, and says, I have this song, I don't know, it's going to be American Girl, American Lady, something, I don't know, whatever. and he plays something like that the first time. What's that like?
He had American Girl, and somebody told me, I don't remember who, yeah, he's got this new song, maybe Mike told me, he's got this new song, and a lot of it doesn't rhyme. And if you think about that first verse, it just doesn't rhyme. I thought, well, that's cool.
Yeah.
And I came in, and they had cut the track, because we cut a few songs on that first record, with in different studios around town, and then they converted the Shelter Records conference room to a studio so that we could record there. I think the rest of them went down and hammered a few nails, not me.
Yeah.
So
couldn't hurt your fingers.
well, I'm pretty clumsy. But I went down to play piano because it was so small that you couldn't cut the piano at the same time as the rest of the band. The drums would get in the mic, the guitars would get in the mic. And I went in and I was like, it doesn't rhyme was the last thought on my mind. I thought, this is a really cool song. It's kind of an odd song. It's kind of an odd sound. And Mike had already put that synthesizer at the beginning that goes, that leads it in. Yeah. I'm like, wow, this is fantastic. And then I realized, oh, this is called American Girl. It's right today is July 4th, 1976. It's actually the bicentennial.
Yeah.
And we're recording a song with American in the title. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I wonder if anybody will ever hear it.
Yeah.
But when he brings a song in, usually he just shows it on the piano or he shows it on the guitar. And he says we're a tough room. Because I think that if we don't like the song, we don't say, oh, God, that's awful. But I think we just don't play it very well.
The enthusiasm doesn't
the
come
enthusiasm. I will try, but we give total respect to anything that he brings in, or him and Mike. But usually he just brings it in and we throw it around, and he's got an idea or two.
But you're such a keen listener and a student of musical history, and you have exquisite taste. I say that because you agree with us mostly. Do you know when it's an American Girl, it's a free fall, and it's one of those songs, and you just say, this is really special. This is going to be the one.
I knew when it was a free falling.
Okay.
Because that record got made. Nobody told me, so I'm like planning to start a Heartbreakers record. And I called up Bugs, who's the crew chief, and said, so Wednesday, this was like Monday or something, so what time Wednesday? And Bugs goes, what? I said, well, they said we were going to start a record on Wednesday. And he goes, what, nobody told you? I'm like, told me what? He's like, Tom's making a solo record with Mike and Jeff Lynne. He's not using the band. And I'm like, what? So at the same time, my dear friend and business manager, Bernie Goodvie, and I were talking, and I said, damn it. He said, great. It'll take him 6 weeks. Now you can go to rehab. I'm like, I don't need to. And my friend Debbie Gold, who just passed away, said, yeah, now you can go to rehab. And so that solo record saved my life.
Oh, wow.
So fresh out of rehab, after a month in rehab, I go over to see how they're doing and just say hi. And I walk in, and he's putting the vocal on Free Fallin'. They don't have the background vocals on or anything, but they got the guitars and the drums and the bass. And he's standing in the control room with just a couple of speakers and not using headphones. And I walk in and the song starts, and he sings the first couple of lines. And I've known Tom for a long time, and I've seen him bring in a song, and I've seen him actually make up songs on the spot. And I was like, okay, this is one. And he finishes the take, and I was like, that's fantastic. Can I play something on it? I'd really like to play something on it. And Jeff kind of shuddered because he knows that I play organ, and he hates Hammonds. And he's like, oh, maybe a Vox Continental. And I'm like, and I dropped it. But I knew that was special. Yeah. I really knew that was special. I really wanted to play on that.
I'd heard that story about Jeff Lynne hating Hammond organs.
Yeah,
Why?
He was in ELO. Screw him.
No. Like some people, like when I was growing up, the Hammonds that I heard played, I didn't like them. And it was when it was later when I realized, like at first I thought the Hammond was what Jimmy Smith did, and I'm not a jazz guy. And when I got older, I went, Jimmy Smith, holy moly, that's amazing. And I saw him play, and I was like, damn. But that wasn't the sound that did it for me. I'd hear a Hammond, and I would think Mr. Moonlight. You know, the only thing that I knew was a Hammond that I liked was Mal Evans holding one note on the Beatles' You Won't See Me during the last verse. And I'm like, that's cool. But the organs that I had heard that I liked as a young, like 11-year-old, 12-year-old starting his first bands were Farfisas and Vox Continentals for the most part. And I did not know that Time is Tight and Green Onions and Whiter Shade of Pale were Hammond organs till later. In the South, you know, I'd hear the Allman Brothers, and it was great, but that wasn't what I wanted to do. You know, so.
Well, a two-part question related to that. The Hammond part on Refugee is iconic and really a key part of a key song in Tom Petty's career. And it opens the floodgates. I think it's not coincidental that all of a sudden you got a lot of offers to play on records, it seemed like, right, in the wake of that. But your role in the band, it's a guitar-based band.
Yeah.
Tom's a guitar player. Mike Campbell's a guitar player.
Now we've got Scott Thurston.
Yeah, and so...
Scott played with Iggy. I mean, Scott's, I'm bored. That's Scott.
So how was your role sort of envisioned in the band? Was it ever explained to you? Did you have a clear idea of where you were going to fit in the mix of those instruments and all those alpha males that were in the band?
I think that I sat in with Mudcrutch, and they thought I was good. And it was like, okay, he's weird, but he's good. So, you know, play with us. And I loved them. The songs were so good. And I was a big Beatles fan, but I like the way the Beatles stuff is very simple. I loved Neil Young's After the Gold Rush, and the piano playing on that is singer-songwriter piano playing. And Carole King plays like that. Randy Newman's a great piano player, but he plays like that. I don't like the flashy stuff. So I was fine in a guitar band. There aren't any keyboard-oriented bands that I really like. I guess the band is kind of, but they're not. And they're just something other. Between Richard and Garth, that's some crazy stuff.
So you never wanted to be Keith Emerson or Rick Wakeman?
No, you know, and I listened to Keith Emerson when The Nice showed up. I listened to that, and it was mind-blowing. And I gave ELP a chance, but I was leaning towards long hair. I was leaning towards the Stooges. I was leaning towards, if I was going to listen to anything that had a lot of keyboards in it, it would be Todd Rundgren and the Wizard of the True Star. But I did really love Floyd Kramer. I loved country music. I loved Howlin' Wolf. Holy moly, those piano players on the Howlin' Wolf records. That kind of thing. And that's what I wanted to do. But they will, to this day, just partly to bug me. If I say, hey, how about I do, they'll go, you shouldn't have joined a guitar band.
I got 6 offers here to play on other records. I'll see you later.
No. It's like, I want to play with these guys. So it's like, okay. And once in a while, I still show up. Iovine, God bless him, and Rick Rubin, too, turned me up. And
Jimmy Iovine, the
bless
producer.
Jimmy did turn me up.
So Jimmy's producing Refugee. How does the Hammond become? Is it just because of Jimmy saying that part should be more prominent or higher in the mix, or how did that work?
Jimmy liked the way I played from day one.
Yeah.
And he turned it up, him and Shelley Yakis. And I read an interview years later where he actually said, he paid me a really big compliment. He said, if you're mixing a record and you've got Roy Bittan or Benmont Tench on the record, just turn them up. And, you know, that's a really high compliment. That's really sweet of him. But what happened with my session career, I'd done a few little sessions, but Jimmy liked the way I played. And I think the order of it was that he was going to produce Stevie Nicks' first solo album. And he called me up and said, will you go hang out with Stevie Nicks and listen to her songs and help her get them in order, you know, and just go through them and see what you like best and get them in rough shape and play them with her preparatory to this record. And I'd seen Fleetwood Mac with Stevie, and Stevie was obviously really good, But my heart was with Christine and Lindsay and Mick and John.
Mm-hmm.
And then I heard Silver Springs, like just the B-side of Go Your Own Way. And I thought that was immaculate and moving. And I'm like, and that was what was in my head when Jimmy said, do you want to go do something with Stevie Nicks? And I said, yeah. So I hung out with Stevie, and it was great. And have you ever met her?
I've talked to her a few times.
I love that woman. She's, she's not kidding. That's not a persona. That's Stevie.
Yeah.
I love Stevie to death. And I had a great time hanging with her and playing on that record. But playing on that record, I met Chuck Plotkin. I met Waddy Wachtel, Bob Glaub, Russ Kunkel, Bobby Hall Porter, David Johnson. And
this is the royalty.
This
of
is the royalty
LA.
of Los Angeles
Right.
recording session musicians. And I met Don Henley because he came in and sang on a song.
Mm-hmm.
And those guys, I think, told their friends. And Henley asked me to play on his first solo album before he got into drum machines and synths and stuff. And through that, I met the other guys like Danny Korchmar, who actually is one of the great rhythm guitar players of the country. Very few people realize that, but his old school rhythm and blues feel is very, very, very deep. And so I fell into the Los Angeles session thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned a lot, and I got to play with some really great people. And I don't know how it worked, but Jimmy, the next thing that Jimmy did was call me up and say, I'm going to produce a song for Bob Dylan. I don't know anybody there. Will you come? And I went, yeah. And I went down to the recording session at Studio 55, I think the place was called. And I knew Shelley was engineering it, and I knew Jimmy, who was producing it. I knew nobody else. But I walked into that room, and I met Jim Keltner and Tim Drummond. And Bob came in late and went across the room with his sunglasses on. Didn't say anything to anybody except maybe hello to Tim Drummond, and we played. Jimmy left in the middle of the session. Unbeknownst to me, I come back for a playback. Jimmy's gone, Shelley's gone. Now I know nobody in the recording session. I'm in a recording session with a bunch of strangers and Bob Dylan. I'm like, what on earth? I found out later that Jimmy felt insulted by something Bob said. I've heard contradictory reports. One was very insulting, and the other just sounded like Bob making a sincere request. Like, this is the studio where Bing Crosby, like, I heard that Jimmy said, what do you want to cut next? And Bob said, I hear this is the studio where Bing Crosby cut White Christmas. Why don't you go get out and get the sheet music and we'll cut White Christmas? Which to me just really sounds sincere. But Jimmy said he was really offended because he thought he was giving him a hard time.
This is the man in his autobiography. Greg and I, whenever we were asked to talk about Dylan, you got to remember, this is the man who said he was influenced more by Gorgeous George the wrestler than by anybody in music.
I don't know, like I haven't seen Bob for a long time, and most of my interaction with Bob, all of my interaction with Bob was really great, musically and limited personally, but it was great. But most of my knowledge of Bob is what key is the song in and how does it go. But I'll tell you that I think that more often than not, what he says is what he means, and people go, oh, that's Bob Dylan being cryptic. But my experience is that more often than not, what he says is what he means. So I think he may have wanted to go play White Christmas.
Well,
but I also heard that he said something really insulting. So it's like,
But Jimmy Iovine, a guy who eventually will hang out with Dr. Dre and Eminem, he obviously had not developed a thick skin by that point.
Jimmy's got a thick skin. But so Jimmy got me, like to where these people heard me and liked me. And Bob, at the end of the day, after not saying a word, walks over to me as he's leaving and says, can you come back tomorrow? And I'm like, I have a band meeting, so no, but call me some other time. And and they called me back when Chuck Plotkin was going to produce Shot of Love. And that was a magic experience. Like to stand there while Bob's cutting, to play organ and stand there while Bob's cutting Every Grain of Sand.
Yeah.
Or like to play Vox Continental on Croon's Still Waiting at the Altar. I finally bought a Vox Continental because I played Bob's on that album. And I was like, oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's a great song, which I believe was only available as a single for a while, right?
It was. It wasn't on the album.
Yeah.
And when the album came out, I was, what the heck?
It's a great song.
Oh, yeah.
Does Bob shoot you a look when he doesn't like what? I mean, how do you know you're because this is a great moment, Benmont, to sort of describe how much instruction do you get when you're called in on a session typically? Is it kind of like, hey, just play Benmont and do your thing, or do they give you specific ideas of what they want? I mean, what's the general, like a Dylan session?
If they have a very specific idea of what they want, they usually don't ask me back again.
Uh-huh.
I just don't learn well. Sometimes, like if Tom writes a song on the piano, he'll have a really cool, simple part like Breakdown. And I'll just go, okay. Or Mike will write the track to You Got Lucky, and I'll do that. Or there was some stuff on Wandering Spirit for Jagger, and Jagger's like, this is how the song goes. And if you ever want to go, what the hell's going on here? Sit next to Mick Jagger on a piano bench while he teaches you a song. It's like, yeah, he's a good songwriter. He's a really good songwriter. That
But
guy.
not a good piano player?
Everybody goes like everybody goes John and Paul. You know what? Mick and Keith, those are great songwriters.
Yeah.
I know he's a cool piano player. He played piano on Hide Your Love, you know. But where was I? I digress frequently.
No, that's fine. That's beautiful. I love the
Does Dylan
digressions.
shoot you a look when
no,
you screw
Dylan-
up,
yeah.
or does Tom?
Tom will kind of shoot you a look, but he basically trusts all of us. But sure, he'll shoot you a look if it's like, what? But he doesn't hear me as loud because he's right in front of Mike. So
Okay.
he doesn't
You can
hear
hide
me as
behind
much.
Mike.
So I can get away with all sorts of stuff. But in the studio, yeah, it's more like if he likes it, he says, do that. And if he doesn't like it, he'll make a suggestion. But, a lot of the time, most of the time, it's just you go ahead and play it. Refugee started out, Mike brought in a track that he had done to a drum loop from a record called Drum Drops. They used to have just records that were just drums playing different grooves, and they would be structured with an intro, verse, chorus, bridge, etc. And it would be different grooves. And he brought it in, it was a Latin feel, with this kind of like... And Tom had written a song to it. And me and Stan looked at each other and went, and so and we didn't have a Latin feel anymore.
Right. Did your own thing.
Yeah.
That's great. Because Tony Williams, I once interviewed him. I was fortunate enough to interview him about working with Miles Davis. And I said, geez, that must have been, he was 19 years old when he first played with Miles. Yeah. And I said, Miles must have been, on your butt all the time about what you were playing. He goes, nope, Miles never said a word to me about what to play. He just said play. And he trusted Tony Williams from the get-go.
Well, why would you play with somebody otherwise?
Yeah.
Tom, if Tom has an idea, he will say, when it comes in here, play this,
Yeah.
And on Hope You Never on Wildflowers, what came out on She's the One, we cut it with Wildflowers, we were going to put an electric harpsichord solo, and I tried. And he went, no, play it like this. And I tried, and no two players have the same feel. And he played the solo himself at the end. And with Bob, when Bob wrote stuff on the piano, when I would do a little recording with Bob, he would usually wind up playing the piano because nobody has that feel. And I would try to do it and be like, no, you play piano, I'll play organ.
He's kind of remarkable because I didn't credit
You
his
think?
keyboard playing. No, I mean for
so many
things that I
reasons.
didn't realize. Like I
there's
didn't
this
realize
guy named Dylan you might want to give
Well,
a second listen to.
The kids are all talking about him.
the keyboard playing. I was not aware of how great he was until he started showcasing. He would get on that grand piano, and especially the grand piano, the gospel voicings on the grand piano. On some of his recent tours,
Last couple of years.
have just been blowing my mind. Like where, and I never seen him do that. He was primarily guitar for a long time, and a little bit of that, little organ playing. But then the grand piano stuff, I'm going, wow, he's real. I mean, that was just a revelation to see that.
When he was a teenager, after Buddy Holly died and Bobby V was ascendant, he played piano with Bobby V for a little while. He was a piano player. And I remember on Empire Burlesque, he played piano on stuff like, I think Plotkin says he played piano on Every Grain of Sand. I'm sure Chuck's right. I wasn't super high that day, but I was kind of like so blown away by the song. And we cut a lot of stuff. So he plays piano on a lot of stuff, on some stuff on Shot of Love. But when we did Empire Burlesque, and he was trying to teach me the song "I'll Remember You," which is a beautiful song, and Empire Burlesque is so synthed out and 80s sounding that it really doesn't showcase the good songs that are on it. But he tried to show it to me, and and I was like, I can't. Like, I don't know what you're doing. He's like, it's this. And I'm like, and I'd try it, and it's like, no, it doesn't sound like that. So he played piano. Mm-hmm. He's a wonderful, wonderful piano player, and he just gets better. And I love that band now with him on the piano. I think it's really special.
Yeah. So it's more of an idiosyncratic style, you're saying. It's almost like Curtis Mayfield playing guitar or something like that. You can't really copy it.
That's a good analogy. I mean, people do cop Curtis. I mean, Jimmy came a lot from Curtis. Like Jimi Hendrix came a lot from Curtis. And I saw Gary Clark open for us recently, and his band will cook a Curtis groove really, really well. They'll just cook a Curtis groove for a long time, and it is sweet because Curtis needs to be here right now because we need Curtis Mayfield to talk and to tell the truth and to be a leader and to be present, to be a uniter. Curtis Mayfield, the loss of Curtis Mayfield is really greater than people think, because we need leaders, and we need people to unite the black and white community and the left and right community. Everybody needs to get united. And Curtis Mayfield was a uniter.
Yeah.
You know, Curtis Mayfield was so special. I didn't know if he was still good in the 90s, like the late 90s.
Yeah,
when did he have his accident? When did he have the accident?
He was early 90s.
Early 90s.
And he was paralyzed for most. He made one more record after he was paralyzed.
And there's some good songs on that record.
Yeah.
But then it was the early 90s, before he was paralyzed, shortly before he was paralyzed. A friend of mine was opening for him at the Palomino. It's a little club in North Hollywood. It was great, where I saw Jerry Lee Lewis countless times. And said, come down, we're opening for Curtis Mayfield. I'm like, okay, cool. I like Curtis Mayfield, but I haven't seen anything he's done for a long time. So I went down, and Curtis was mind-blowing. He was so good.
Yeah.
And what he had to say, and like, I've got that soundtrack to Superfly, and I play that all the time.
Yeah, it's amazing.
a great record.
So far ahead of its time.
And the impression stuff. I mean, come on.
It was remarkable.
He was also an extraordinarily charismatic man. You know, there's a word that's abused, I think, especially in show business, right?
Yeah.
But this guy radiated something special. Are there other people like that you've met through the years that you're just, you walk in the room and you know that this is not, I mean, you've played with incredible people, but this is somebody special.
Well, I'll tell you, I do wish that I'd played with Curtis, and I do wish that I'd met Curtis, but I think that I had a lot more to learn from Curtis than I had to offer to Curtis. Yeah. I don't know. The strange thing is that Mudcrutch came off the stage that first time I saw them at the Astro Lounge. And on stage, I was watching Randall play the drums because he was so good. But they came off the stage, like the stage was probably a foot high.
Yeah.
And, like the size of this carpet, which is not very big, in this tiny club. And they were coming over to say hi, where me and my friend were sitting. And Petty and Campbell, you just went, whoa.
You knew.
You just went like, no, you didn't know something. You just went, oh, I noticed these guys. It was almost like they were kind of intimidating.
Yeah.
And Ledden and Randall weren't.
Yeah.
But Petty and Campbell were kind of intimidating.
But everybody has these people in their life. We had the privilege once. We both interviewed Tom. It's been those phoners, before. But Tom came in and we did 2 hours with him.
I remember.
Right?
I remember.
And then to see him suddenly, he started talking about George Harrison and driving around the island. Harrison had a place in Hawaii or something, and driving around on the bulldozer with Harrison. And suddenly it was Tom was 17, the way he was talking about Harrison, feeling that special. We're sitting there with Tom, and we're feeling like we're with,
Look, we were in Hamburg, and we had played, there's a great picture, I don't know if you ever saw it, it's Bob's birthday or something. It was probably Bob's birthday or George's birthday. I don't know whose birthday it was, but we're on this tour, I think it's November of '87, and we're in London. And Jeff came backstage when we were backing up Dylan, and there's a picture, and it's Jeff Lynne and Tom Petty and George Harrison and Bob Dylan and me and Mike Campbell. It's the Wilburys that might have been.
That's great,
Oh,
man.
And Harrison was saying something about, I remember him saying something, I thought he said something like, I'd have a band and it would like have changing members and it would call itself the Trundling Wheelbarrows or something like that. I heard him say something like that that night, but I didn't really speak to him. And then either then or at some other point, I came up to Tom's room and George Harrison was sitting in his room. I couldn't speak. I said something really idiotic, like,
Right.
do you still call your haircut Arthur? That's not what I said, but just about that idiotic, you know?
Yeah.
And so I didn't really know George. I just met him a couple of times. I was very, very intimidated. Ringo, I'm not intimidated by.
No.
You know, and Paul, I've only met in passing. But
Yeah.
George, that was just mind-blowing.
No,
But
Ringo's,
all of
I
those
think
guys are mind-blowing.
Ringo's a guy you can go have a beer with. You know,
well,
but there was
you can't because
Not anymore.
Yeah. But he always felt that way. Whereas George, is there something special? Yeah.
yeah, but George, like everybody who knows George or knew George, like Mike, Tom, Ferroni knew him a little, Jim Keltner, all of these people, they're just like, no, he's calm, he's chill, he's the salt of the earth. And his son Danny, I know.
Yeah,
pretty
we've had
well.
him on the show.
I love Danny.
All right, one more session question, and I want to talk to you about your solo album. You got to play with Brian Eno.
I did, man.
Yeah.
Oh, listen.
So indulge me.
Well, let me see what time it is. I'm just curious. I don't have anywhere to be. I'm just wondering how long I'm going to talk about Brian Eno.
Okay,
Listen,
20,
now
30,
listen.
40 minutes? Yeah.
So, I'm in college in New Orleans, and when I was in boarding school in New England, rock criticism had started. Like Cream showed up,
Yeah.
and Rolling Stone showed up. And I'm like, this is interesting because I love this stuff. I want to read about it. And I would read Patti Smith when she was writing poems and stuff, and rock criticism for Cream.
For Cream.
And I'd read Lester Bangs and all of this stuff. And I really loved Cream. I liked Rolling Stone, but I loved Cream. And so I was hearing about all of this stuff, and I was learning to check things out from that. And I moved from that to when I got to New Orleans, the record store stocked The Enemy, Sounds, and there was another English paper, like a Record Mirror or something like that. And I'd look through that to see what's happening in England, because I thought, well, the Beatles came from England, Rolling Stone came from England, you know, the Zeppelin came from
Good
all
music
all
comes
this
from
music
England,
comes
yeah.
from England. So what's coming from England? Not realizing that England decides something's cool one week, and the next week they're like, that sucks, now we like
They
this.
build you up, they tear you down.
But I kept reading about Roxy Music, and I went, that's interesting. So I got an import copy because this record store, Mushroom Music or something, sold imports. And I got that Roxy Music album long before it came out in the States. And I took it back to my dorm room, and I put it on and went, what on earth is going on? He looks like Lawrence Harvey, and he sings like that, which is very strange. And who's this? Paul Thompson, the drummer, fantastic.
Yeah, great drummer.
The whole band, Manzanera, very strange, great sunglasses.
Thompson, very Stan Lynch-like.
Very.
Kind of, yeah.
And a terrific drummer.
Yeah.
But then I'm like, who's playing keyboards? And it's like Brian Ferry's doing this, and I'm like, who's playing that other stuff? And it's Brian DeSaint,
De La Salle.
Eno,
And he's got ostrich feathers.
with ostrich feathers.
Yes.
Well, ostrich feathers on the second record, I think. But I'm like, this is really, really cool. That's a really cool way to play keyboards. Who is this guy? And so I paid attention to that on the first two records. And then the third record, is it Stranded or is it Street Life is on it? It's Stranded is the third record. When Eno's gone, it's Eddie
Eno's
Jobson. And he's great. I love that record. But Eno was something, so I had my eye on him. And he keeps showing up, and he puts out solo records, and he does this, and then he becomes this big producer. I get a call from Bill Bentley in Los Angeles, who was with Warner's at the time, I think.
We know Bill well.
Yeah, so
Salt
I
of
get
the
a call
earth.
from Bill, and he's like, would you be interested in doing something with Brian Eno? I'm like, yes, you know, absolutely. And Eno was producing U2 and Talking Heads and stuff like that by then. But I'm like, that's great. I could go forever on Eno, just on the fact that Brian Eno is a guy who seems intellectual and is very intelligent, very well read. I met him for one day, but by seeing what he has done in all these art bands, and U2 is kind of, in a way, an art band, though it's a mega stadium band.
sure.
It's got that element. Brian Eno loves rhythm, and that's why he's such a good and successful producer.
Oh, yeah, get him
He's
talking about Sly Stone.
Rhythm.
Yeah.
He's all about rhythm.
Yeah.
But Bentley calls me and says, "Would you be interested in working with Brian Eno?" I'm like, "Yes." He says he's in town. He records, manipulates the recording, and then does a lecture the next day and presents the recording. Like, great. I said, "Why me?" He said, "Well, it was down to you and somebody else, but he liked your name." He had no idea who I was. He just liked my name. And it's like, okay, so what's the deal? Like, well, it's Benmont, Tench, and the drummer is Sugarfoot Moffett.
Yeah.
And the bass player was Romeo somebody.
Yeah.
And really good. And Greg Aragorn was playing guitar. So I came down, and I'm like, and he was such a sweetheart. I really, really liked him. And we go into the studio, and he's got some synthesizer for me. And I say, I'm going through the sounds, trying to find a sound. I say, what do you think I should play? What sound are you thinking? And he hits a button. He says, try this one. Every key on the synthesizer plays a different drum or percussion instrument.
Mm.
And that's what it was. There was no notes at all.
Huh.
So we start recording. We don't start recording. Everybody's warming up. The drummer is kind of going doom,
Sugarfoot's played with Michael Jackson. Yeah.
He's amazing. And I think Romeo may have too. And he's just kind of checking out the drum sound. And Romeo's kind of going doom, dun, 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 and checking out the bass sound, and Greg's doing whatever he's doing on the guitar, and I'm going doom, dun, 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 trying to figure out what on earth I'm doing. And from the control room, Eno goes, "Perfect, play that, play that." And when I hold up my two fingers, play something else. When I hold up my first finger again, go back to that. And that's what we did. And at the end of the day, which was a really great day, he said, "Thanks a million." And he edited it together and played it at UCLA or USC and put it out on NerveNet, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, at first it showed up on like My Squelchy Life, which never actually comes out.
Right.
And then NerveNet. But you never know. He could be very well using you again now. Because he just has this magical suitcase of sounds.
I got a call not long after seeing if I wanted to go to Bath, not Bath, but Bath in England, and make a record, I think. And I was like, yes, please. And then I got a call saying, no, they changed their minds. I think, maybe they didn't want to. Maybe they got somebody better or somebody who suited the thing. Because I'm in this band that is a rock formalist band, like a rock classicist band. They don't think of it in terms of that. I don't think any of them has ever read any rock criticism ever, because the Heartbreakers really are like, no, don't intellectualize this stuff. Don't think about it. Keep it coming straight from the heart. Keep it coming straight from here, because don't get distracted. But I love going to the other sides of it. Mm-hmm. But to try to figure out what can I gather from this and bring back, but hit with the Howlin' Wolf. Mm-hmm. And I was playing with Sean and Sarah Watkins and Chris Thiele, after Nickel Creek broke up, but they were all hanging out and we were all playing at Largo. And Thiele is just a staggeringly proficient mandolinist, and very deep, and not smarty pants, but it's really smart. And Sean and Sarah are stunning too. And it's bluegrass, and the best that I ever played it was this period when I figured out how to play it like Jose Lee Kennard, or Lafayette Leak, or one of those guys that played with Wolf. Throw that into the bluegrass.
Oh, wow.
But if you go play with Brian Eno and you go, oh damn. Or you listen to that middle part of Virginia Plain, where it's just a synthesizer going, it's like,
chaos.
That's flawless and perfect stuff. Wow. And try to get that, and try to throw it into the thing that Bob did in the Blonde on Blonde era, and when he was with the band, that thin Mercury sound thing he talks about.
Yeah.
The Costello, I think, may have name-checked, or some writer name-checked when he put the Attractions together and did this year's model. If you can inject that thing not in some way of trying to be clever, but if you can just have it soak into you so that it'll come out somehow when you play Bye Bye Johnny. Or maybe not when you play Bye Bye Johnny, but maybe when you play You Don't Know How It Feels. Or when you play, it'd be interesting to try to throw that as free fall. I don't know if that would work.
You'll get one of those looks from Tom then,
Try it
right?
on stage.
On stage, yeah.
But that's what I'm doing on Running Down a Dream. It's like there's no keyboards on that except a little chimey thing that Jeff did. But when we play it live, I just kind of barrel house my way through the ending, and that's a pleasure.
Yeah, well, it's got a whole different feel live when you guys play. It's a huge song for you guys when you do it live now.
Yeah.
It seems like
Yeah.
that's a moment in
Yeah,
the show.
it's a different thing. It's
Yeah.
a different thing.
I do have to ask you one other. I mean, Hurt is just Johnny Cash doing Hurt is one of the most staggering performances I've ever heard, and you're all over that. How did that work out?
Rick Rubin,
Yeah.
he and Cash were really, really close. They became really close. And he did that first record that was all acoustic. And then the second record, I think, is the one that he wanted the Heartbreakers to be a band on it. And I'd met Cash before on a Highwayman record that Don Was produced. But we went down to play with Rick, and Rick kept me in the loop, and Mike, when he made the more acoustic records later. And we went over to Rick's house once, and I think Rick would take all these ideas to Cash and say, check this song out. And if he liked it, he'd do it. And actually, he trusted Rick, so we actually cut Addicted to Love. And it didn't work, but it was pretty wild. He was game. It was like, might as well face it, you're addicted to love.
Johnny Cash should just go anywhere.
It was like, he trusted Rick.
Yeah.
He trusted Rick. They were really, really, really tight. And Rick, I'm sure it was Rick who said, what if you sang Hurt? And John Carter Cash did a guide vocal when we cut it so that John could just like save it, I suppose. And Rick guided it really well. And then I think after John, I just played piano, and I think after John sang it, we did some more. After Johnny Cash sang it, we did some more stuff. But I've always thought that was a really spectacular song.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that I always thought that was a spectacular song. And Trent Reznor's a really, really good songwriter, like a really from the heart songwriter. And that's all that I care about. But the idea and what Cash found in it as a different source of hurt,
Yeah.
and coming at it as somebody nearing the end of their life, and that kind of accumulation over your life. And who did the video? Mark Romanek?
I don't remember, but the video was amazing.
The video is, it's of a piece. But working with Johnny Cash, God bless Rick. Rick brought me in to do some wonderful stuff with a lot of wonderful people. But working with Johnny Cash, we'd talked about it for a long time and never pulled it off. And then on St. Andrews and Wilshire, maybe it's St. James Church, I don't know, in Los Angeles, had a day free, and we went down, and I played a church organ. And I didn't know how to pull all those crazy buttons. So the church organist sat next to me.
And there's all those pedals, right?
And he was great. He was really instinctive. I said, I can give you a nod where to like make it bigger or swell or whatever. And I tried that once, and he was way ahead of me. He got it. And I played the church organ, and it was set up, and you would look into a mirror, and you could see the preacher's chair. And, you know,
Yeah.
so that they could take the cues or whatever from the preacher.
Right.
Start the hymn. And Cash was sitting in this beautiful carved wooden preacher's chair, and June was sitting next to him, in another chair, and maybe sitting, you know, on the step next to him. The recording engineer was there, and Rick was there, and that was it. And we cut Danny Boy, and Maybe You'll Never Walk Alone. And being in a church and seeing Cash with headphones on, sitting there over the microphone, singing, not just singing, the experience of that.
Yeah.
There's nothing like that. There's nothing like that. The things that I've gotten to do not just in the Heartbreakers, which are a whole nother world, but Fiona Apple, who's really, really special, like really special. The Club Largo in Los Angeles, I met Fiona there. Largo changed my life. But to be on a small stage with an upright piano and play Irving Berlin ballads with Fiona Apple, that's of a piece with being in a church and playing Danny Boy with Johnny Cash. Cash has a lot more cultural resonance than Fiona, maybe, definitely. But I mean, Fiona's a major.
Yeah.
People are very aware of Fiona, but they aren't aware of what there is there. That's what you want to do. We were playing Gothenburg, Sweden with Bob, and I didn't talk to Bob much. I'm intimidated. He was always totally nice to me, but I don't know. I feel awkward. But we're walking on stage, and during that tour, at a certain point, we'd play a ballad, and it would be I'll Remember You or some other song, or Sweetheart Like You or something like that. And we're walking on, and I'm next to Bob, and I turn to him and I say, so do you want to do I'll Remember You, or what do you want to do in that spot? And he says, do you know tomorrow's a long time? I'm like, yes, I know tomorrow's a long time. We never rehearsed that. He said, we'll do that, just you and me.
Wow.
Maybe Mike. And I'm like, okay. And so we went out, and in an arena with 15 or 20,000 people, we played Tomorrow's a Long Time. Just me and Bob. I think Mike did play, some stuff. And then we played Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, which we'd never played. And that's why I play music. That's precisely why I play music. For that. Just for that. And for what the Heartbreakers sometimes do, used to do. We had a live song called Driving Down to Georgia. And Tom, maybe at a gig, maybe at a rehearsal, but it never got planned. It ended. And when it ended, he didn't stop playing. He started playing really slow, 2 chords, and he started singing. And I specifically remember at the Zenith or somewhere in Paris, with Stan and Howie. I don't know if Scott was even in the band yet. He just starts making up this song that's called Lost Without You. And maybe he had sort of done it a little before, but he went there. He can go there. He can do that. He never does it in an arena. He never does it. He freestyles on his radio show just talking. But that guy can go to that place. He never does. He doesn't show it anymore.
Yeah.
But that's what you want to do. Lost Without You, and Tom goes into some rap about you in a hotel with your $10,000, and like one of these days, I know everything's just going to be all right, and just bring it up and down, and that kind of thing. That's what it's real, and playing with Fiona is a lesson in this is real. This is just like, let's find it, let's bring it through, let's throw it out. And I'm not going to pretend this or that. Not that she doesn't know stagecraft or whatever, but it's real. And Bob, I think, you get the real guy, and maybe he might be a little cranky at sometimes, but you get the real guy. And I've seen him when I've just gone to see him, and I've watched him. I've gone, he's just playing some blues. This is okay, but it's like whatever. And then all of a sudden, they hit a chord, and he starts singing Not Dark Yet. And the whole real Bob Dylan shows up. And as an audience member, it's stunning. But if you are playing with an artist when that light shines through them and comes out, there's nothing like it.
Wow.
And you get paid, too.
And you get paid.
Wow.
I know.
Good life.
I
want to be Benmont Tench.
It's an old saying, but you know what you get paid for? You get paid for rehearsal, and you get paid for travel time, and you get paid
and carrying the farfisa.
You get paid for carrying the farfisa, although somebody else carries it now. God bless them.
That's a good deal.
But you get paid for all the hang time. You the gig you do for free.
Yeah.
The rest of it you get paid for.
Well, Benmont, we could talk to you all day, but I think we have to eventually
We're almost there. We're
wind
almost
up.
all day right now.
Maybe a good place to end, where many other people would have started. You're a late bloomer. 2014, You Should Be So Lucky. You finally put out a solo album. 2014.
Yeah.
One in all these years.
Well, I didn't have the nerve. And Glenn Johns said to me 10 years ago, if you ever want to make a record, let's make a record. And I'm like, it's like when Mudcrutch said, sit in. I thought, oh, he's just being nice.
Yeah.
And like 10 years later, I had had a few things happen in my life, and I had some songs, better songs or old songs that I had made better. And I was like, hey, these songs showed up for a reason. I don't want them never to be heard. And I liked the songs. And I called Glenn, and he said, sure, when you want to do it. And we got like my friends who were my favorite players outside of the Heartbreakers came. We tried to get Stan, and Stan just couldn't make it work. He couldn't get out to California in the time because we wanted Stan to play on the record too. We got this fantastic band with Blake Mills and Ethan Johns and Jeremy Stacy and Don Was, who's one of the great bass players, unsung bass players, incredible bass player.
Funny guy too.
Yeah. Very funny guy. Very good guy. Very good guy. Yeah, so we went in and made a record, and I played a couple of shows then, and I've started playing shows again. And I've started playing entirely solo, which is really strange for a guy that's always been in a band.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to do it because I have friends who, I have friends who go out and play solo. And it's like, there are things I haven't done in life. I want to do them. But when I played a couple of solo gigs this last fall, I found, I really enjoy this. I really do enjoy this. And the songs, the older I get, the more I like to hear songs with just the songwriter. Sometimes maybe with an upright bass, but maybe not even, because unless you have a bass player like Don Was or Sebastian Steinberg, then music, I think, can really easily turn into this thing where, okay, it's starting with just a piano and a voice. There's a drum fill comes in, the band comes in the chorus something will happen, the second verse, the organ or the background voice. It's like you tune out because you know what's going to happen. And with modern recording and the grid, people correcting things to a beat or cutting it to a auto-tune or cutting it to a click track or a drum machine, some kinds of music, that's a hypnotic and very cool thing. But you're never going to be surprised. It's not going to speed up for the chorus and drop back down to get quiet. It's never going to do that. It's going to end where it started. It's always going to do that. It doesn't matter who the band is, and some of the great bands, but it's like, I'm not going to be surprised. I might be surprised by the songwriting, but I won't be surprised by the performance. And I won't hear the song because I'll hear it because it's that structure just kind of glosses over me. And if it's just a songwriter singing, then I hear the song.
Yeah.
Some people like Leonard Cohen could use that band, but he had that really incredible soundscape behind him.
Yeah.
And that mesmerizing voice that just got so much better the older he got. And there it is. But I heard my wife, I came home from the show the other night, my wife had seen Roger Waters do a new song on Colbert. And she said, this is really great. And I said, okay. And so we put it on the record of it. And the first verse is like, this is fantastic. The band comes in, I can't hear the vocal anymore. It's like, come on.
Yeah.
So it was interesting to I'm not playing solo shows or making a solo record to like try to go ego gratification, this kind of thing. I'm really not. It's like, I really like the songs. And so I want people to hear the songs.
Yeah.
That's it. It's just like,
no, it's
hey,
a fun
check these
record.
songs.
There's this quiet, seductive charm to this
thank
record.
you.
Can you play us out? Would you give us one of those
I can
tunes
play you
before
out.
go?
Is there anyone that you like?
I just, I
What's
digitally
on there?
now, I listen, I start, and then it goes for 3 spins, and
Well,
I have no idea.
let
I
me
love
see.
the whole thing. It's of a piece. It's of a
There's
piece.
actually a song on there. There's an instrumental song called Wobbles.
I was going to say that. That's your New Orleans.
Check this
yeah.
out. Check this out, though. See if you like it. We recorded this instrumental song, which it was basically me writing an exercise to try to like learned to do something that I saw Harry Connick do that was a New Orleans deal. And we cut it, and it was great. And I called it Wobbles after a friend of mine in New Orleans who said, after I'd met her, she said, "Come to New Orleans, I'll introduce you to Wobbles." And I said, "Who's Wobbles, your dog?" She said, "No, that's me when I've had a few drinks." So I just made up this story about a woman after a long night wobbling home down Esplanade. So we record the instrumental, Glenn mixes it, and late at night, like we said, late at night I wake up and this whole lyric shows up. So I'll play it out, and feel free to fade it. And I'll play you the lyrics, I'll sing it.
All right.
Is that cool?
Excellent.
It's slower.
Yeah.
It's more,
We will consider it a pleasure.
it's more doo-wop than it is New Orleans. This song is called Wobbles, and on my record, on the You Should Be So Lucky album, it's like... So, it's called Wobbles because I have a friend named Wobbles, and she lives on Esplanade, and there were no lyrics when I recorded this. But a day later, the lyrics showed up, and the lyrics are like this. Let's see. When the night leaves the quarter and the dawn's light kisses the river, that's the time when I first saw her, my darling. She was wobbling down Esplanade. See her stop, sway and shimmy. What she got plenty. Is she sought out, oh, by so many, my darling, and she's wobbling down Esplanade. Oh, ain't she something? Lost in the rhythm, what I give her to be with her, Lord, to kiss her as she's wobbling down Esplanade. Lord, ain't she something? Lost in the rhythm, what I give her to walk with her, just to kiss her as she's wobbling down Esplanade. And she's wobbling down Esplanade.
Yeah, Benmont Tench with Wobbles from his Well, that's actually an add-on to that brilliant solo record that you put out. You Should Be So Lucky.
That's the
in
Sound
2014.
Opinions exclusive.
That's the
version.
Sound Experience exclusive with the lyric. And if you can listen to the record, you'll go, why did he put a lyric to that? Because it showed up.
No, it's
Because you
beautiful.
felt it at the moment. That's been the underlying, this rock critic concept. The two kinds of rock critics, Benmont. Those who believe in authenticity.
Yeah.
Someone's feeling something right now, and those who are egghead.